Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Looking down at the letter in his hands, Uchiha Sasuke read the sloppy script slowly. It was from Naruto, who was congratulating him on his success protecting the Hidden Leaf village. His idiot friend was saying something about the Uchiha's quest of atonement and then mentioned how Sakura thought his efforts were very much like the members of the once proud Konoha police force. Maybe it was the overwhelming sense of nostalgia that came with those words that had the Uchiha turning on his heels. Or maybe it was this sudden desire to stand, if just for a moment, in front of that building that had once displayed the crest of his clan. Flashes of his older brother carrying him on his back came to the front of his mind. Perhaps it was time he returned home. Sakura gathered the herbs she needed for the healing poultice she had in mind. Turning, she began to walk briskly down the road towards the hospital. The pink-haired nurse struggled to meet the new demands that were left in the wake of the recent phenomena of exploding humans. Sadly, there was nothing to be done for the innocent lives who had been used as bombs. However, with Hinata's help, Sakura was able to recognize and remove any strange chakra that was present in other individuals. Other medic ninjas in the lands of water and lightning quickly followed the Kunoichi's lead soon after she relayed her methods to Kurigakure and Kumogakure. Within weeks, the foreign chakra had vanished and the villages soon pursued their pre-existing peace. Haruno Sakura was then able to look at the various other injuries related to the strange explosions. Ninja who had been injured during their attempts to stave off exploding humans were her most pressing patients and suffered mainly from severe burns. Burns were well within her range of healing capability. However, Sakura's supply of expendable chakra could only be stretched so far. She began to feel a little fatigued by the end of the day and more burn victims were coming in by the hour. Not only this, but the other villages were facing the same demands. For the benefit of herself and the other villages, Sakura spent the evenings developing a very strong burn solvent that could easily be replicated and passed on. The herbs she had now were just what she needed. Clanging into the medical lab at 2 a.m. wasn't an abnormal habit of hers anymore. Except for the few late-night roamers and ninja on watch, there weren't many individuals up this late. Sakura found that this was her best time for productive and undistracted work. Laying out her medical supplies on the table before her, she began her craft immediately. Her plan was to create a compound that acted as a second skin, thin but hard enough to touch without peeling away. The idea was that as the solution dried over the burned skin, a protective shell would form on the outside while keeping the medicine on the inside. Over time, with frequent application combined with chakra, the covering would allow new skin to form without damage from reopening or splitting. How she would manage to create this, she only had a faint idea. But that's why she was here to test an experiment. Sakura looked down at her left arm. Although there were several adequate patients being housed at the hospital due to their critical condition, Sakura felt that neither waking them up at this hour or using them as guinea pigs were good for their recovery. On the bright side, she had managed to carefully collect chakra throughout the afternoon and had enough in store to continuously heal any minor self-inflicted injuries that could react sorely to her new cure. Glancing over to the wall, Sakura found a candle that she had lit previously. Grasping it in her right hand, she held the flame under the bottom of her forearm, allowing it to sear her skin. She didn't even flinch. The pain was more than bearable in comparison to anything she had ever suffered as a ninja. She applied the solution gradually to the charred place on her arm and slightly frowned at the severe stinging sensation spreading across her arm. She bent down over her scroll and noted to add less harrow leaf in the mixture, then began to proceed. Sakura lost track of time as the faint line of sunshine began to trace the outcropping of trees beyond the village gates. It seemed that the sun was rising earlier and earlier recently. Glancing down at the large mess she had made in front of her, Sakura sighed and lifted up the small container she held in her hand before her. It wasn't much to show for her efforts, but she would let the results speak for her. 6:23 a.m. She had done it again. That was twice this week that the kunoichi had gone without sleep. Her shift at the hospital began at 8. Perhaps if she hurried home, she could catch an hour of sleep. She frowned down at the mess on the table. She'd clean it up before work, she thought as she walked out the door and down the stairs. Sakura carried the new medicine with a growing pride and relief, thinking solely of her patients. She stopped mid-step when she sensed a very familiar chakra slowly approaching the village. Instantly on guard, she snapped her head in the direction of the village gates. Could this be real or was it another trick? Perhaps it was another Sasuke clone intent to capture her. How many times had she imagined this very thing to happen? Was it still her hopeful imagination? Sakura waited a minute for her head to clear. The chakra grew increasingly and steadily. Forgetting sleep, Sakura ran towards the gates. Sasuke stepped off of the forest path, stopping as he looked at the familiar sight of the Leaf Village gates looming above him. Taking in a deep breath, the Uchiha sighed and began to walk forward. Returning was difficult for him, for many reasons. First, being in the village meant that he wasn't tracking down Kagaya and Sasuke couldn't help the nagging feeling that he was losing time. Not only this, but being in the village posed a risk to everyone around him. He was the last Uchiha and even after achieving the peace between nations, there were still individuals who sought him for his power. Chino and Noaki were two of many that Sasuke knew would come for him. He removed all emotion from his face as he approached the guards waiting for him at the entrance. It had been years since he left the village, but Sasuke knew better than to pretend that these people might overlook his past crimes. He was lucky to leave the village at all, barely being able to escape an eternity of darkness in a straitjacket. However, instead of being given a cold greeting by the guards, two men whom he barely recognized, lifted their hands in greeting. Uchiha, they called out, squinting through the morning darkness. As he came closer, the two men gave him large grins as they recognized the face that matched his chakra. Welcome home, they replied in unison. This was not the greeting that Sasuke had prepared himself for. Since his return after the war and even up until his departure, he had gotten looks of disgust from everyone he came into contact with. Ninja, civilians, and even Akamaru had growled at him when Sasuke happened to pass by him. He had frowned at the dog and was tempted to tell the mutt that he liked cats better. Most of these encounters, of course, happened in the very beginning, right before higher authorities demanded that the 6th Hokage bind him and lock him in prison. He hadn't expected anything else from the village he betrayed and offered no resistance when Kakashi escorted him directly from the battlefield to the jail. He would pay for his mistakes, willingly. The guards in front of Sasuke, however, didn't flinch or sneer at him as he made his approach. In fact, they began to congratulate him on defeating Chino and stopping the exploding humans. As he turned to acknowledge them, Sasuke felt a mixture of feelings with those words. Should he be happy that the village knew about his efforts to protect them? Sasuke had originally planned to be the village's burden wielder, just like his older brother. The man working in the shadows. Itachi never received the gratitude that he had deserved, so why should he? Sasuke fought down the familiar anger that rose in his throat at the thought. He sighed. Even though he still felt uncomfortable with this praise, he remembered that he wasn't that angry person anymore. He had changed. Sasuke-kun. Glancing to his right, Sasuke saw a familiar pink-haired kunoichi. The sun was rising steadily behind him and the dawn illuminated her features, making her hair seem a darker shade of pink. It was shorter, he noted. It had been over 2 years since he'd last seen her. She stood a few feet away from him, just inside the gates and made no attempt to come forward. She was panting slightly and he guessed that she had run here when she picked up on his chakra. He hadn't been expecting to see her at this hour in the morning. In fact, his goal was to arrive before dawn as to avoid as much attention as he possibly could. He moved away from the guards and closer to the person he had once considered to be dear to him. He stood in front of her, a swarm of childhood memories coming back to him. It seemed so long ago and the vision seemed to belong to someone else, the person who Sasuke was trying to bring back a little more each day. The Sasuke he had been 3 years ago certainly wouldn't have given the memories much consideration. Maybe he was changing after all. Sakura's eyes grew big at his nearness and she remained silent, utterly speechless at the miracle in front of her. Sasuke guessed her thoughts and decided he would break the silence this time. I'm home, Sakura. I can't believe it. You're finally home. The Uchiha responded with a small tilt to his lip, and if she would have blinked, Sakura would have missed it. However, Sakura was unable to blink as she gazed up at the individual she had gone more than 2 years without seeing or hearing from. He looked terribly warm, her medically trained eyes assessing his form for any signs of physical injuries. Although he appeared unharmed, Sakura could tell that he had been involved in a recent battle due to nicks and bruises on his skin, as well as the various tears in his cloak. Even though he seemed taller and his hair was longer, he looked just like the Sasuke she remembered. His hair was even rising up in the back to form his usual spiky Uchiha hair. Except now, his hair covered his left eye, the eye she knew was the Rinnegan. Something in his look had changed since she'd last seen him. Was that the trace of emotion in his expression? Yes, was his audible reply, before he looked back at the guards who kept their gazes fixed on the two of them. He frowned at them and moved away from her, walking through the gates. Sakura felt unsure of whether or not it was okay to follow him, until he slowed and glanced back in her direction as if to ask her if she was coming. It made her heart jump and it took every ounce of her willpower to keep from running up to him and hugging Sasuke out of her excitement. She caught up to him quickly and the two began to walk in the direction of the Hokage's building. She couldn't believe that he was finally home and was here, walking beside her. She had practiced this reunion in her mind so many times, but Sakura found herself at a loss for words. After a few seconds of silence, Sakura asked, "Where are you headed?" He made brief eye contact with her before stating, "I need to report to the Hokage to relay important intel and notify him of my return." Of course, she thought to herself. Stupid question. After 2 years of not talking to him, Sakura felt slightly out of practice. Starting to feel slightly insecure and unsure of what to say to him, she glanced down at their feet as they walked. Sakura noticed suddenly how casually they were walking together, like it was something they always did together. Sakura couldn't help but notice how slowly Sasuke was walking, as if he were actually taking his time so that they could walk together. Maybe it was just wishful thinking on her part. "You're up early," he stated plainly, glancing up at the brightening sky above them. Sakura was somewhat shocked at his observation and giggled. "I could say the same about you." He made no reply, so Sakura continued, "I was just working on a healing treatment for the burn victims at the hospital. Not a lot of time to waste these days." She raised the small casing of solvent in her hand, forgetting that she had even had it. Sasuke glanced over at her then, raising an eyebrow. "Burn victims?" "Yes," she replied. "The exploding humans did a number on a lot of individuals who put their lives at risk trying to stop them." She noted his frown at her words and wondered why he would do so. "Thank you, by the way," she stated briefly. "For what?" he asked, still looking forward as they walked. "For what you did to help us. For what you did to help them. Without you, we wouldn't have been able to." He stopped walking suddenly and turned to her, cutting Sakura short. "Without me, none of this would have happened." He was looking directly at her, challenging her to contradict him. Her heart began to pound furiously under his direct gaze. Sakura worked up her courage. "That's a ridiculous statement. If it weren't for you, those two would have walked around with hate in their hearts for the rest of their lives. What you did was a good thing. You helped them." He simply stared at her and Sakura offered him a small smile before continuing to walk. He followed, saying nothing. They walked in silence for a few minutes, Sakura simply enjoying his company. Despite the rising sun, the village suddenly seemed brighter to Sakura. The colors of the buildings are more fantastic in the dim light. Sasuke returning to the Leaf Village made it feel more like home, almost as if she were returning, too. Sasuke, there's so much you have missed. So much I want to tell you, she stated, turning to him. Where would she even begin to start? Sasuke gave her a slight nod, giving her permission. Sakura smiled and began to tell him about all that had transpired in his absence. Naruto and Hinata's wedding and how everyone was at a loss to what to get them for wedding gifts. She even added a grumbled remark about some sort of baking competition between herself and her Yamanaka friend. She even told him about Shikamaru and Temari's engagement and relayed the details of Gaara's 20th birthday celebration. Sakura noted that 2 years had certainly not changed his conversation skills. He remained quiet throughout the entire story. He nodded at appropriate intervals and Sakura appreciated the fact that he was trying. The sun was almost completely above the forest line now and Sakura fell silent when they came upon the administrative division of the academy. Sasuke began to open the door before she stopped just outside, not following him in. She hung back, looking to her left, and Sasuke turned to her. Forgive me, I have to return to the hospital. My shift starts soon and I'll have a mob of angry patients to deal with if I am late. She gave him a small smile as he stood waiting with the door open. She felt uncomfortable at his blank stare and thought that maybe she should just walk away. Ah, he finally stated before releasing the door and turning back to face her. Placing her arms shyly behind her back, Sakura began to work up her courage. Listen Sasuke, if you need anything while you're here, you can come to me. He moved toward her slightly, allowing a small smile to tilt the corner of his mouth. Sakura's heart stopped at his next words. Thank you, he said and went inside. Sasuke looked over at the clock on the wall. 7:58. Where was that man? Sasuke had always known Kakashi to be late for everything, including the meetings, missions, and training sessions back when Team 7 were kids, but did not stop to consider this bad habit might carry over to an official role such as Hokage. The Hokage was supposed to be in his office at the crack of dawn, prepared and ready to assign missions and review official paperwork. By the looks of the towering piles of unorganized documents all over the Hokage's desk, Sasuke could see why Kakashi might refuse to show up on time. 5 frustrating minutes later, a very familiar ninja with a ponytail opened the door, yawning. He stopped for a second when he noticed Sasuke, but entered the room anyway and crossed his arms behind his head. I thought that might be you Sasuke, but seeing you in person is still as surprising as ever. He yawned again. Shikamaru, Sasuke acknowledged, sometimes I wonder how anything gets done around here with the two of you in charge. Shikamaru let out another yawn, unfazed by Uchiha's blatant remark. Dealing with you is going to be such a drag, he sighed, moving to a smaller desk on the left side of the room, taking a seat at the chair in the corner. He rubbed his eyes and began to read one of the many papers on his desk. Sasuke stifled his impatience. I need to report to the Hokage. Where is he? Relax. I'm certain he will be here sooner or later, Shikamaru replied, gesturing at another chair in the room. In the meantime, have a seat. It was at that exact moment, Sasuke sensed the chakra of his previous sensei as the white-haired ninja made his way to his office. He entered in an almost identical process that Shikamaru had, looking tired and uninterested at the work day ahead. Kakashi glanced over at Sasuke and the look on his face said that he had not been expecting to see the Uchiha anytime soon. Sasuke. It's been too long, he said after a few silent seconds, walking over to his former student and placing a hand on Uchiha's right shoulder. I didn't recognize you without the turban. I see you've lost the poncho, as well. Such a shame. I thought they suited you. At the mutual laughter of both Shikamaru and Kakashi, Sasuke sighed. Yes, these two were in charge of the safety of the Leaf Village. They were making his job a whole lot harder. Taking his hand from his student's shoulder, the 6th Hokage retreated to the chair behind his desk, looking at the stacks of unfinished paperwork. He immediately turned to Sasuke, giving him his undivided attention. Sasuke guessed that it was merely another way of distracting himself from the heavy workload surrounding him on all sides. I have important intel to relay to you in regards to what we last spoke about. I request a meeting with you and Naruto. Kakashi raised an inquisitive eyebrow. I see. Unfortunately, Naruto is not in the village at this time. Sasuke frowned at this information. Mentally scanning the village for his loud friend's powerful chakra signature, he found nothing. When will he be back? It is crucial that I meet with the both of you. Kakashi absently fingered the edges of the nearest pile of papers on his desk, but paused to look up at his former student's question. With Kakashi's silent evaluation of him, Sasuke could only guess what he was thinking. He inwardly winced as he felt Shikamaru's observant glare land on him. He realized what the both of them were thinking. How could he, who had been gone so long and remained absent of his own free will, start asking when his former teammate would come home? Hadn't they all asked the same question about him? He could only picture his friends as they continued to wonder when he would be back for good. Yet, they made no demands of him to return, they all extended him the patience that gave the Uchiha his freedom. A small sting of guilt made his way to the front of his consciousness, but the Uchiha pushed the feeling away and kept an even stare at the Hokage. After the incident with Kido, and more recently, Shino and Fushin, Sasuke was even more firm in his resolution of absence. He presented a danger to his friends by even being alive. If his enemies still considered him a vagabond, they were less likely to seek him out at Konoha. Even after the Kido incident, when Sakura's life was threatened by a man who wanted the Sharingan, Sasuke became even more cautious about returning home. He knew that weaker enemies would go for those close to him. Even though he did show up to help, Sakura had already taken care of everything herself. His friends didn't need his protection from these types of enemies. Stronger enemies would either challenge Sasuke directly, or would either consider him so insignificant that they would neither seek him or the village out. These enemies, Sasuke would have to find himself. Kagaya was one of them. He also took comfort in the fact that Naruto would be there to protect the village in the chance that an extremely dangerous enemy did show up. Kakashi's answer snapped the Uchiha out of his increasingly deepening thoughts. He only left last night. His mission's length depends on its completion. Sasuke sighed slightly in his frustration. He wanted to ask where Naruto would be located, but he knew Kakashi would tell him the information was classified. I see, Uchiha said, pondering his next move. How long was he willing to wait for Naruto? What if he missed something important by delaying his journey? How much time did he have left? Then again, with Naruto away, was this village safe from any real danger? Who would protect it while Naruto was gone? Sasuke glanced up at the two men before him. Kakashi wasn't even looking at him anymore, and was instead concealing a familiar little orange book between two sheets of unfinished paperwork, pretending to be working. Shikamaru was leaning his head in his right hand, starting to doze off. Sasuke sighed irritably at the two of them. He supposed he would have to wait until Naruto came home. Sakura found that she was having a rather difficult time staying on task today. Every few minutes she caught herself glancing out the window towards the Hokage's tower, thinking of the man who she had seen this morning for the first time in 2.5 years. Sakura had never found it difficult to concentrate on her job before, even going as far as to ensure that her focused mindset passed on to the rest of her workforce. Today was entirely different. Endless streams of thought kept distracting the kunoichi as she replayed the events in her head from this morning over and over, reminding herself that Sasuke had actually come home and that she hadn't imagined everything. This Sasuke was the real one and not some cruel trick like Kido had used on her several months ago in hopes of capturing her in order to draw out the Uchiha. The man had underestimated her strength. Not only did Sakura escape from his trap, but she managed to defeat him on her own while her friends took care of his subordinates. She remembered seeing Sasuke's fleeting form after he had defeated a few of Kito's lackeys, leaving nothing behind but flickers of flame. Sakura had been sorely disappointed at his disappearance but took comfort in the fact that Sasuke had indeed shown up to help her. Although he would never directly admit it, Sakura knew that deep down he cared for his friends. It was proof that the old Sasuke was slowly coming back to them. The thought made her smile. Absent-mindedly applying the burn solvent to another patient, she almost missed what the shinobi was asking her. Did I say something funny? She suddenly looked up at her patient and for the first time, really assessed her client. He was a red-haired man with a scar running from his left ear to his chin. He was flashing her a large grin with his eyes closed, an expression that reminded her of Naruto. She registered the question, realizing that he was asking her about the smile she had just expressed without thinking. Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking about something else. She noticed the worried look her apprentice was giving her. Shame, her client said, leaning back on his good arm. I thought someone was finally recognizing my comic potential. Sakura giggled at that. See, I am funny. The man said, then winced as Sakura added the last of the medicine to his right arm. With her right hand, she began to run her chakra over the medicine to dull the sting she knew he was beginning to feel. His entire arm was a solid green limb of herbs that was putting off the sharpest smell. As her chakra touched it, the medicine instantly hardened, creating a thick cast around the burns to defend them but was still flexible enough to allow movement, though she advised against moving too much. Only her chakra would be able to soften it again for removal, but until then the medicine would stay put until the burns had healed. From the frown on her patient's face, Sakura could tell that he would not be happy to have to deal with this makeshift cast. Right, then, she exclaimed, satisfied with her work. I'm afraid all missions will be put on hold until those burns are healed up. No matter how hard you try, that is not coming off. However, to prevent itching, I advise you not to get it wet. The shock that flashed across the redhead's face made Sakura smile. No more sauna. Sakura put her hands on her hips. This man was becoming more like Naruto with every passing minute. Absolutely not. Do you want to scald those burns before they even get a chance to heal? But it smells terrible, he grimaced after holding it up to his nose and inhaling. You'll get used to it, I promise, she said, turning and reaching for the man's chart, locating his name at the top. Mizuno, Haru. All right, Mizuno-san, you are free to go. You are scheduled to come back in a few weeks. Make sure to remember what I told you, Sakura said, showing the man out. He nodded vigorously, making a show of holding his arm out as far away from himself as possible. He flashed her another big Naruto smile before exiting the building. After finalizing a couple of notes on his chart, Sakura handed it back to her assistant. Sakura-sensei, is something the matter? You haven't been like yourself today. She glanced over at the girl who was showing sincere concern for her. Sakura was annoyed with herself for being so obvious and not having better control of herself. She stopped herself from looking over at the clock. Sakura was honestly relieved that nobody at the hospital had learned about Sasuke's return yet. Once the rumor began to spread, she'd be an open book to those who knew her best. She glanced back over to her apprentice. I'm fine, Kirai. Just a long night. It took me longer than expected to develop the burn solvent. The two were walking down the hall towards the next hospital room. Kirai's concern vanished and was replaced by surprise. You developed this on your own in just one night. My goodness, sensei, do you ever do anything besides work? You sure are something. Sakura gave the girl a small smile as they entered the room. She managed to catch a glimpse of the clock just in time to see that she was 2 hours away from the end of her shift. Despite her undeniable distraction, today was very successful. The only patient left was the last of the burn victims. The sun was shining through the glass of the top floor of the hospital, creating streaks of pink and orange against the tile floor. Sakura was in the medical lab once again, cleaning up the mess that had seemed to grow as she made frequent stops here throughout the day, recreating the medicine she had just conjured this morning. The first few patients had taken to her first batch quite nicely, and Sakura had been able to make necessary adjustments to the recipe as she tested it on more and more of her clients. Sakura hadn't been able to completely get rid of the stinging sensation like she had hoped, but that was a small issue if she paired her chakra with the medicine during the application. It helped nullify the sting. For those who had been severely injured, Sakura had to first heal major tissue damage with her chakra and then apply the medicine after most of it was completely healed. Sakura had exhausted almost all of her reserves and was now running on what was left of her energy. Not sleeping the night before hadn't left much to run on. If it weren't for Sasuke's return, Sakura would be completely dead on her feet. She scraped the last of the herbs into an empty container and carried it with her to her office a couple floors down. Placing it on the crowded shelf to the left of her desk, Sakura was wondering where she should start to find Sasuke. Should she even seek him out? What if he had already left? She had tried sensing his chakra signature throughout the day and had found nothing. Perhaps it was a precaution the Uchiha had taken to avoid causing a stir. Running into an animated Ino 2 seconds after exiting the building told Sakura that this was not the case. Sakura, did you hear? Her blonde friend said, stopping a few inches from in front of her face. I heard from Shikamaru and had to be the one to tell you. Sasuke's back. Actually, Sakura started with a smile, rubbing the back of her head shyly. I knew already. I saw him this morning. You what? Ino screeched, grabbing her friend by both of her shoulders. What happened? Sakura jerked away from her friend who was now staring at her with a surprised, expecting sort of look. Her hands were high on her hips. Sakura waved frantically, exclaiming, Nothing. Nothing happened. I just walked with him to the Hokage's tower and... You walked with him? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Ino's eyes narrowed suspiciously. I haven't had the chance to. Sakura defended, beginning to walk down the path towards the Hokage's monument. It was the honest truth. Besides, Sakura wasn't sure if Sasuke wanted anyone to know he was home. She certainly wouldn't be the one to tell anyone. Now that it seemed word had gotten out on its own, Sakura was grateful she had someone to talk to about it. The two were walking besides each other now, but Sakura couldn't seem to escape the sideways scrutiny of her friend, who now seemed disappointed that her surprise had been spoiled. She jumped back a little when Ino leaned into her face with the same glare. What did you guys talk about? She asked. Sakura immediately wanted to say that they didn't talk about anything. Even though this was a lie and Sakura had replayed their conversation from this morning in her head on repeat all day long, Sakura didn't have much to tell her. They had only talked briefly and the short walk had seemed like only a few seconds. To be honest, there wasn't much said, she said simply. Ino looked disappointed but didn't push the subject, to Sakura's surprise. As they reached the end of the corner, she noticed Sai standing in front of the Yamanaka flower shop. He had arms full of freshly cut flowers and Sakura could only guess that Ino had had him running around all day doing errands. Ino thanked him, swooping up the beautiful array of multicolored flowers in her arms and carrying them inside. Sakura exchanged a few polite words with Sai before Ino returned from the building. Sakura then realized that the two of them had evening plans together. Sakura felt a little lonely, watching as Sai took her friend's arm in his as they walked off together. Before they left, Ino flashed a smile at her, wishing her a silent, good luck. It was odd, finding comfort in her friend's concern when they had once been brutal to one another over the same man. As she and Ino matured, trivial things like that didn't come between their friendship anymore. However, they did still find it necessary to compete over smaller things to remind each other that they were still rivals. Sakura smiled when she thought about their recent food pill baking competition over an argument that they had had that was started over a picture frame they both wanted to buy as a gift for Naruto's wedding. Smiling at the memory, Sakura looked around as she noticed a few quick glances at her from passing ninja and other villagers. They looked away when she made eye contact. Ah, she thought as she assessed these looks. News was spreading like wildfire. She knew by the glances that those individuals knew Sasuke was home and was either looking at her because they thought he might be with her, or that they half expected her to be displaying some sort of reaction to the news. Sakura frowned at this. She wondered where Sasuke was at the moment and how she would find him. By the scrutiny she was receiving from others, she was certain that he was still in the village. Taking a steady breath, Sakura chased after Sai and Ino. Sai, wait a minute. Sasuke stared at the Uchiha symbol that was still incorporated into the insignia of the Konoha Military Police Force building. Sasuke had forgotten all about it during his time in prison. Even though he spent a year of his life in this very building, his eyesight had been sealed the entire time he had been a prisoner. He hadn't seen the symbol to remember that his clan had been its founders. Well, not exactly, he corrected himself. It had been founded by the Senju and was given to the Uchiha as a sign of peace between the two clans. However, he couldn't help but remember a certain man in an orange mask telling Sasuke that this building and what it stood for had been the Senju's way of distancing the Uchiha and separating them from the Hokage's seat. Sasuke pushed the thoughts down as he felt his former anger spark deep down in his chest. No, he told himself. Tobirama, the reanimated second Hokage, had told him that this wasn't exactly the truth. In fact, the Konoha Military Police Force was meant to give the Uchiha a purpose, a funnel for their energy that would benefit the Leaf Village. Of course, that same Hokage said himself, that if benefiting the village meant getting themselves killed in the process, they would still be considered useful. Sasuke pinched his nose as he exhaled the memory. Facing the village had been a lot harder than he had thought it would be. There was the constant reminder of his family's death, their mistreatment, his brother's sacrifice. The list went on. On his journey, he was free from all of this and wasn't bothered by any sort of reminder about his past. Searching for Kagaya had given Sasuke a purpose that kept him going, being away also helped him clear the anger from his heart. But as he felt it trickle back in, Sasuke managed to focus on a good memory that came with the familiar symbol. When he was little, his older brother carried him home after he twisted his ankle. They had passed this very spot that day and Itachi had first explained to him why the building displayed the red and white fan. Itachi had told him that only superior shinobi could enforce the law on other ninjas. He remembered how he had exclaimed to his older brother that he aspired to be a part of the Leaf's police force one day, too. He remembered Naruto's letter. So, I talked to Sakura. You're like the police force. His childhood dream. He once again thought about Itachi and how his sacrifice had practically saved the Leaf Village. Itachi had killed the entire Uchiha clan, the army that threatened to destroy it. His brother had been the superior shinobi that enforced the law on his entire brethren. Sasuke released another sigh as the sun set to the left of him, an orange glow lingering on the horizon. He sat on top of the nearest building, adjacent to the Konoha Military Police Force. Sasuke figured that concealing himself in its shadows would keep any unwanted attention away. It had been 2.5 years since he'd been home. There was bound to be a stir. Sasuke, what are you doing up here? Stunned, the Uchiha swerved to his right to see his pink-haired friend walking towards him across the rooftop. How had she even been able to find him? Taking a seat a couple feet away from him, she gave him a small grin. You're not the only one good at concealing your chakra. Although he would never admit it, he was slightly impressed that he hadn't been able to sense her chakra. He hadn't forgotten her chakra control abilities, but to hide her presence completely from him was something to marvel at. How long had she been standing there? He noticed that she was still wearing the same lab coat he had seen her in this morning. He assumed that this meant she had been working all day. He gave her a nod in greeting, then turned to look back at the building across the road. How'd you find me? Sai found you, she said, pointing to a small chirping sound across the street. Narrowing his eyes, he activated the Sharingan, seeing for the first time, a small orb of chakra perched on one of the buildings in front of him. Before he could even think of sending a shuriken through it, the little bird of ink flew up in the air and disappeared. Slightly annoyed by the thought of that ninja who was technically considered a part of his former team, and for the fact that this wasn't the first time that Sai had spied on him, Sasuke said nothing in reply. They sat in mutual silence for a while before Sasuke glanced over at Sakura. She sat staring out across the rooftops and he couldn't help but notice how bright her hair was in the sunlight. Despite his annoyance, he appreciated her quiet effort of company. As Sakura matured, Sasuke found that she was rather good at reading his emotions. He followed her gaze and realized she was evaluating the same symbol he had been just a few moments ago. You're the one who told Naruto about the Uchiha connection with the police force, weren't you? His words seemed to startle her, like she hadn't expected him to speak. She turned to him, surprised. Yes, she replied. Naruto and I were talking about you the other day. Naruto said that even though you were away, he felt like he was still on a mission with you to protect the village. Sakura faced the building again, continuing, I told him it was like you were a part of the Konoha military police force, you know, like your clan. She emphasized the last part by pointing at the Uchiha crest on the building in front of them. He didn't know why, but Sasuke took comfort knowing that his two teammates continued to find the good in him. He had gone on his journey not only to find Kagaya, but to atone for his sins. Sasuke didn't deserve the happiness his friends offered him here. Quite frankly, it was hard to even be around them sometimes, remembering how much pain he had caused the both of them. When I was little, it was my dream to be like my father, the head of Konoha's military police. He didn't know what had caused him to say this out loud, but he felt like Sakura would be the person to tell, if anyone were to know about it. By the unsurprised look on her face, it seemed that she had guessed as much. She smiled at him, leaning forward to wrap her arms around her bent legs. Was it? I didn't know that. Yes, he said, finding the bright star that had just revealed itself in the sky. He pushed the thought of Kagaya away at the celestial body's sudden appearance. Instead, he began to wonder how much about his past his friends knew. He was aware that they knew about Itachi and his lifelong secret. But just how much about his clan did Naruto and Sakura really know? Sakura surprised Sasuke with what she already knew about him. Her quiet voice brought him out of his thoughts. It's like you've achieved that dream, without realizing it. I think your family would be very proud of you. He made brief eye contact with her at the statement, and he quickly looked away. Sasuke suddenly felt very grateful for her words. Would they be proud of him, he thought. He wouldn't think so after all that he had done. He once thought that the only way to make them proud was to avenge them. Sasuke was able to see past that now. Regardless, her words had brought him a small peace. After a few minutes of silence beneath a starry sky, he heard Sakura yawn. He glanced over at her and saw for the first time how tired she looked. Her eyes displayed dark circles under her lids and her shoulders slumped slightly as she leaned against her knees. Sakura had met him this morning at the gates and he remembered how early it had been. Not to mention, she had worked all day. He rose to his feet and Sakura looked up at him in surprise. He could tell that there were so many things she had been wanting to say, unfinished thoughts waiting to be verbalized. Selfishly, the Uchiha wasn't sure if he was ready to hear them. It would only make it harder for him to leave, again. Come on, he said, looking away from her. I'll walk you home. Sasuke remained silent as they walked together towards her home. Sasuke wasn't sure where Sakura was living these days. He knew she probably didn't live with her parents anymore, at least. He let her lead the way. Sakura also didn't talk and it annoyed the Uchiha to no end. He could tell she was on the verge of saying something, but just as she was about to, she pursed her lips together. She had spoken to him this morning, but now she seemed hesitant. There was a part of the Uchiha that was glad she was quiet, leaving a formality between them. However, there was a part of him that wished she would speak to end the tension that hung over their heads. She had never been as loud or boisterous as Naruto, but this unsuspecting quiet was beginning to bother him. He shook his head at the thought. It had been a while since he had last seen her. There was bound to be a stiff silence. As Sakura stumbled along, he noticed again how tired she looked. You work long shifts at the hospital, the Uchiha said awkwardly, turning away from her redirected gaze. Offering him a small smile, she replied, yes, they often run together. When she didn't elaborate, Sasuke asked, what do you mean? There are a lot of demands, lately, she explained. A team of medical ninjas was sent to Kumogakure, so I've been a little short-staffed at the hospital. He recalled his more recent conversation with one of the Raikage's right-hand men. Sasuke had traveled to Kumogakure when he discovered their missing shinobi on an island in the Land of Water. C had told him that a Konoha medical team was sent to Kumogakure to help assist them in removing Chino's foreign chakra from their shinobi. He remembered the acute sting in his hand when he reached into the pool of red, the chakra swirling within it, cutting at his skin, trying to enter his body. The red pools in Hell Valley were where Chino had kept the ninja as she turned them into human bombs. He wondered if extracting the foreign chakra caused pain for the medic because of the chakra's nature. You might be wondering where Naruto is, she offered, and Sasuke blinked in surprise. Tsunade, Hinata, and he are accompanying the medic team to Kumogakure. The Byakugan can see the chakra, and after helping me discover how to remove it, Hinata was an asset to the team. After showing Tsunade how I was able to extract the chakra, she was able to improve upon the method and went to my place. Sasuke raised his eyes in surprise. She had been the one to discover how to extract the chakra. When C had told him that Konoha had developed a way to do so, he didn't imagine Sakura being the one responsible. Naruto wanted to see B, I imagine, she added quickly, interrupting his thoughts. Ah, Sasuke thought. That made sense. It was odd, knowing his closest friend was now in Kumogakure, just days after having been there himself. He pictured the large octopus bull eight-tailed beast in his Jinchuriki. He began to recall the battle he had with the self-proclaimed rapper, Killer B. He smiled at the thought of the world's two most obnoxious shinobi as being friends. Glancing over at Sakura, he thought more carefully about what she said. You stayed, he said, matter-of-factly. Yes, she replied, I chose to stay behind, this time. She looked away shyly and Sasuke wasn't sure why. He looked away from her and remained silent. After a few quiet seconds, Sakura stated, Kurigakure and Kumogakure have their own set of victims from the exploding humans incident, but so does Konoha. I stayed behind so that I could research and develop a burn solvent that helps speed up the healing process in patients without the necessity of extreme chakra depletion on the medic's part. She exhaled tiredly and glanced down at her arm. Sasuke snapped his attention to the direction of her gaze and noticed large circular scars running across the bottom of her forearm. His eyes widened as the realization hit him. It was shocking to make the connection between Sakura and the extent she was willing to go to. He recalled other moments of her fearlessness. Most prominently, Sasuke remembered the faces of 3 Oto Chunin applicants terrorizing the girl who fought so desperately to save Naruto and himself. More recently, he could recall her unexpected efforts in the war. She was no longer the teammate who relied on her partners to defend her in battle. Instead, she was becoming a shinobi the ninja world relied on. The Uchiha in him had always admired power, and this capable Sakura was beginning to grow in his acknowledgments and respects. Looking back at him, Sakura offered another tired smile at his silence. He shook his head and replied lamely, so not much sleep then? No, not much. They stopped at a small little apartment located in a tight alley between the left corner of the hospital and the connecting path that would eventually take you into the Uchiha compound. She reached in her pocket for the key and fumbled to unlock the door. Sasuke wanted to ask her why she had chosen to move so far across the village, but his conversational ability seemed to be exhausted. Thank you, again, for walking me home, Sasuke. She turned towards her door to enter but stopped short and turned to face him once more. Can I see you again, tomorrow? I know Naruto isn't here, but maybe you, Kakashi, and I could go out for ramen like old times and catch up. He frowned automatically before he could catch himself. He knew he wasn't afraid to be involved anymore, but a rendezvous with his old team wouldn't help the situation at all. They both knew he wasn't home for good. Perhaps this was why she hadn't asked him how long he had been planning on staying. He didn't want her to get used to his company again only for him to leave so quickly. Through his traveling, Sasuke had decided that being home meant bringing danger to the village. In other words, he aimed to eliminate the risk by searching for the biggest threat to the current peace. If Sakura knew this, she would be devastated. I have to continue my training, tomorrow, he said bluntly. It was better to put a limit on their interactions with one another. It would be the best thing he could do for her. She looked away at his answer, then gave him a small smile. Maybe another time, then. He nodded silently and turned in the direction of the Uchiha compound. For some reason, as he walked away, the Uchiha raised an arm in farewell. He supposed Sakura wasn't the only one who had changed. He needed Naruto to hurry up and come back so he could return to his mission and let his friends move on with their lives. Sakura didn't see Sasuke the following day, or the next, or even the next. In fact, she didn't see him for the first week that he was here. She wanted to seek him out, to tell him he was being unfair by keeping his distance from those who cared about him. Had she not waited, and waited for him to come home? And now, he was here and she was just about sick of waiting. Sakura shuffled the papers on her desk into a neat pile and pushed them to the side. It was mid-afternoon and contemplating about Sasuke hadn't helped her get as much paperwork completed on her break like she had planned. She rubbed her temples and closed her eyes. After sitting in silence for a few minutes, Sakura began working again. The pink-haired medic had scheduled checkups for all her burn patients today, which had kept her very busy. Working on these select patients within a shorter time frame allowed her to compare results between patients more quickly. Her main objective was to evaluate her burn solvent's short-term efficiency. A week wasn't long enough for severe burns to completely heal, but she wanted to make sure the herbal cast was holding up for her patients. The first patient was a young kunoichi named Hoko who had suffered third-degree burns across her right shoulder and up her neck and face. Unfortunately, the woman's right eye had been completely disintegrated due to its direct connection with the explosion. Sakura had barely managed to save her left eye and had spent a large amount of chakra trying to heal the rest of Hoko's face. Once Hoko had finally stopped screaming, Sakura had wrapped the right side of her face and kept a medical patch over the left eye, returning later to apply the solvent to her burns. Even though the kunoichi's former face was impossible to return to its previous state, the healing solvent paired with Sakura's chakra was working miraculously. Her skin showed little redness and the ointment was helping the skin regenerator without major scarring. Hoko's left eye was restored while her exposed right eye socket was now almost completely covered with a layer of puffy skin. Does it look bad? Hoko asked with a hoarse and broken voice, reaching up to touch the newly applied bandages. Her good eye was uncovered now and she was able to move her lips, which Sakura was relieved to see. It looks better than I originally thought it would, Sakura replied, stretching out her palm to rest on the girl's hand. The girl frowned despite the good news. She understood why a young kunoichi would be upset and Sakura knew she couldn't offer any heartfelt words that would genuinely make her feel better. After a long minute, Sakura finally said, "What you did for your village was honorable and brave. I am thankful that we can rely on shinobi like you to rush out onto the battlefield. The girl looked away from her and Sakura reached over and grabbed a mass of blue from the side table next to her. Placing the forehead protector into Hoko's hand, Sakura said, "You may not have a right eye anymore, but in its absence, I see a badge that declares your bravery in battle and dedication to your village. There's no one more worthy of wearing this headband." For the first time since the incident, Hoko's lips tilted upward at the edges. "I couldn't have said it better myself," came a voice from the doorway. They both turned to see the sixth, displaying the white and red of Hokage. He entered carefully and presented himself to the ninja and took his hat off. Hoko tried to stand but Kakashi raised a hand and she sat back down, offering a small bow from her seat. "Lord Hokage," Sakura interjected on Hoko's behalf, "what a surprise. We were not expecting you." Sakura's former sensei turned and nodded in her direction. "Yes, well, I wanted to acknowledge these fine ninja." Hoko looked down respectfully when he turned back to her. The sixth proceeded to thank her for her assistance in the fight against the exploding humans. She was going to be publicly honored along with the others if she gave her assent. Kakashi offered her a masked smile when she nodded slowly to his question. This is how it went for the rest of her shift. Kakashi followed her to all her appointments, recognizing each ninja individually and lifting their spirits by honoring their efforts in the battle. Sakura smiled as her former teacher went above and beyond to interact with these ninja. To this day, he continues to surprise her with his performance as Hokage, and in this moment, Sakura couldn't help but feel an extreme admiration for this man who once had to drag around 3 ignorant little ninjas who thought they knew so much. Sakura could honestly say she missed the days where the 4 of them were a team, Naruto and Sasuke at each other's throats, constantly trying to outdo one another, Sakura feigning after Sasuke and yelling at Naruto, Kakashi hiding in a tree somewhere, ignoring their squabbling altogether as he read Ika Ika Paradise. How much had the 3 of them really changed? "Sakura?" Kakashi asked, a few minutes after the last patient walked out the front doors. She just realized he had asked her a question and she had been too lost in pleasant memories to hear him. "I'm sorry. Did you say something, Kakashi-sensei?" she asked, turning to face him. Shaking his head, Kakashi stated, "I asked if you needed an escort home." Sakura smiled, shaking her head and waving her right arm. "There's no need. I'm sure the Hokage has more important things to." "Oh nonsense," he interjected quickly, motioning towards the door. Honestly, Sakura felt obligated to stay for the night shift. She had taken on most of the day's work herself, but they were still short on staff. "Come on now," Kakashi called out to her. "Hokage's orders." She scowled at him. She hated when he used the Hokage card on her. After being reassured by her apprentice, Kirai, who took charge in Sakura's absence, the pink-haired Kunoichi joined her former sensei. The streets were lit by the glow coming from the many shops and markets who hadn't quite reached closing time. It was hard to escape the attention of many who recognized the Hokage. One marketer even rushed out onto the street to offer the Honorable Hokage a free dango, to which Kakashi tried to politely refuse, but the kind merchant wouldn't take no for an answer. Kakashi thanked him and smiled largely. As the 2 of them walked farther away from the village's center, the nighttime bustle began to fade behind them. Once they were out of sight from the kind merchant, Kakashi put the sweetly smelling dango in Sakura's hand. She smiled, taking a bite from one of the brightly colored dumplings on the stick. Her team had always known her weakness for sweets. After a minute, Kakashi removed his hat from his head, allowing it to rest on his back. He inhaled the fresh air loudly and Sakura noticed his usually fixed posture relax slightly. Seeing him this way made the young Kunoichi think of the past again, back to the days where Kakashi wasn't in charge of the village. She couldn't imagine the stress he dealt with. After giving him a few minutes of uninterrupted silence, Sakura asked, "What's this about Kakashi? Why are you walking me home?" He asked, dropping all previous formalities. Can't your former sensei assist you home, on a dark and scary even? Let me guess, she interjected, pointing an accusing finger in his direction. You're trying to get out of more paperwork, aren't you? He laughed and waved his hands innocently, and Sakura knew she had hit the nail on the head. That's not my only reason, he defended himself, then placed a palm on the back of his hand as they continued to walk down the darkening path. I actually wanted to talk to you. To me? About what? Sakura asked, just having taken the last bite of her final dumpling. His former playfulness turned solemn as he asked, are you getting the rest you need? Rest? Why was he asking her about that? She couldn't just come out and tell him she hadn't slept much since the medic team left for Kumogakure. Not only was she responsible for maintaining the hospital, but ever since Sasuke's return, she had arrived home feeling exhausted, but restless thoughts of him kept her from sleeping. It was all she could do to spare the chakra to erase the dark circles from her eyes every morning. When Sakura didn't reply, he continued, I understand that your load is heavy right now at the hospital, but you need to make sure that you are taking care of yourself, first. Who told you I wasn't? She asked, giving him an innocent smile. The ninja beside her switched from Kakashi to Hokage as he said, actually, I have been keeping an eye on your situation since the departure of the medical team last week. I checked your hours and confirmed them with your staff this morning. I can say for certainty that you are not resting. Annoyed at his snooping, she glared at him, pointing her now empty dango stick at him. Look, they need me, and I know my own limits. He didn't look properly chastised. In fact, he gently took her left arm and pulled down the sleeve of her lab coat to reveal her circular scars. If you knew your limits, these would be properly healed by now. She pulled her arm away and tugged her sleeve back down. Look, I'm doing what I have to. My patients need me and I don't have the extra chakra to spare at the moment. And this is why I have arranged for you to have the next couple of days off. After seeing Sakura's gawking silence, the Hokage seemed to change back into his sensei persona as he smiled and walked a couple steps in front of her, knowing he had bested her. But, Sakura implored, what will they do without me? It's all been arranged, he replied, coming to a slow walk as the two of them approached her little apartment nestled into the side of an alley. She inhaled to come up with an argument, but Kakashi placed a hand on her shoulder and offered her a tired smile. So take some time off and leave the rest to me. You do too much, sometimes, he spoke from behind his mask. As she watched her sensei begin to leave, she called loudly after him, what am I supposed to do? Sleep. He called back, and, maybe go visit a friend. A friend? She didn't have to ask who Kakashi meant. After the white-haired ninja disappeared into the night, Sakura turned her head to look down the opposite path, the narrow one that eventually wound its way towards the Uchiha compound. Sasuke frowned at the red and white fan displayed on the stone in front of him. The last time he had visited this place, he had come with Orochimaru and Taka in order to reanimate the first 4 Hokage and learn what the purpose of a village was. His family's district had been in rubbles and Sasuke had barely managed to locate the stone door that concealed a hidden meeting place beneath the shattered structure of his clan's Nakano shrine. When the Akatsuki had showed up to claim Naruto, the village was completely destroyed by pain. Despite its location on the outskirts of the village, the Uchiha compound hadn't escaped destruction. Now, it had been cleared from the shattered pieces of wood and stone that had piled on top of each other. In its place rested an expanse of endless green, free from buildings or any familiar structures that Sasuke remembered from his childhood. There was a sudden sadness that overtook him as he remembered his childhood home and the people who used to occupy the space before him. Other than the memorial before him, there was no lingering evidence of the clan who once lived here. And yet, there was a part of Sasuke that was relieved when he saw the place of his family's massacre wiped from the face of the earth. After he had left Sakura's several nights ago, he had turned towards the Uchiha compound. Just as he arrived at the border, he had suddenly redirected his path towards the forest surrounding the district. He had been weary from his travel and didn't want to face the ruins of his clan that night. Not in the dark, where the memories of his family's death would have surely haunted him. Instead, he decided to camp out among the trees for a few days until he was ready. It had become a common practice of his, sleeping in the forest. Despite Kakashi's efforts to provide him with a room, the Uchiha had insisted against it. What was the point, he had thought. It wasn't like he was staying long, anyway. Now, as he looked at the memorial, his thoughts flashed back to the Konoha Military Police Force building. It had been in the same location as the previous one. Had that building escaped the demolition, or had they simply rebuilt it the exact way it had been before? The Uchiha crest that he had evaluated just a few days ago stuck out strongly in his thoughts. What was the point of rebuilding it with the Uchiha crest just as it had been when the clan served as the police force? I had a hunch you might be here. Sasuke turned slowly to face the ninja who had suddenly appeared behind him, unsurprised. Of course, Kakashi always had a way of showing up when he was least expected or wanted, for that matter. And I suppose you are looking for me, for a reason. He replied. It came off more disrespectful than Sasuke had meant it. But it was still better than all the snide comments that had come to the surface of his tongue upon being interrupted by his former sensei. Despite his efforts to change, Sasuke supposed that he would always possess that signature sarcasm of his. The white-haired man came to stand beside him and together they appraised the memorial. After a few minutes of silence, actually, I'm not the only one who has been looking for you. Sasuke received this comment with even more silence. They both knew who Kakashi was referring to. Sasuke had been purposefully avoiding Sakura's bright chakra signature ever since he had walked her home a few nights back. It hadn't been too difficult, considering her almost 24-hour presence at the hospital. The hospital was the area he had been staying the farthest away from. Not only was he avoiding Sakura, but he had been dodging anyone whom he had past connections with, especially those who maintained contact with the pink-haired Kunoichi. Not receiving any response, Kakashi continued, I'm here because of recently received word from Yamato. He says I have a significant number of ninja who are seeking to become Konoha citizens, thanks to you. Sasuke looked at the Hokage then, understanding dawning on his features. He made an effort not to look even slightly sorry. Instead, the Uchiha smirked and said, well, what was I supposed to do? Leave them how they were. The ninja Yamato was referring to where the ninja Sasuke had recently released from their bounds to their previous owners, in a place called the Colosseum. Located on an unmapped island in the middle of the ocean, wealthy individuals gathered at this place to fight their ninja against competing ninja. The rules were that if a ninja was to lose in one of these fights, the owner of the victorious ninja received the losing ninja as their own. If a particularly strong ninja were to partake in the fight, different owners would offer up their strongest ninja in battle in order to acquire the ninja for their team. This was how they advanced their power. He had visited this place with Orochimaru in order to meet Oyashiro N, the leader of Bright Lightning Group's original owner. He had been rumored to collect Kekkei Genkai, and Orochimaru had entered Sasuke in the fight without his knowledge with the hope that Sasuke's Sharingan might draw the man out. Oyashiro took the bait and Sasuke defeated the man's ninja that had been pitted against him. During the meeting with the repulsive man, Sasuke had acquired the information he sought about Bright Lightning Group. Afterwards, he challenged all the owners in the Colosseum, offering the Uchiha Kekkei Genkai to any who were brave enough to put their ninja forward. In the end, he had been victorious against them all, had acquired them as his own, then set them free. Of course, Yamato, being in constant surveillance of Orochimaru's activity, was nearby and Sasuke entrusted him with the freed ninja. Kakashi lowered his Hokage's hat, turning to look Sasuke squarely in the face. The mask on his face didn't hide the prominent lines of a smile as he said, I suppose not. It seems you are doing the right things this time around. A palm landed firmly on his left shoulder, and Sasuke couldn't help but widen his eyes at the sudden contact from his former sensei. It had been years since he had received a compliment from anyone, let alone any form of physical contact. It was even more surprising coming from Kakashi, a man Sasuke had once believed to be far too disappointed in the Uchiha's past to acknowledge their previous bond. As if reading his mind, the white-haired ninja spoke, with everything that's happened recently and seeing how much you are making a difference in people's lives, I just want to tell you that I am proud of you. It's good to have the old Sasuke back. As Kakashi removed his hand and began to walk away, Sasuke was stunned at the words still ringing in his ears as they worked their way into his heart. His gaze followed his former sensei as he walked towards the direction he had come. Oh, Kakashi added, turning back to face him. I suppose since you're the reason for all our new citizens, you won't mind helping me welcome them to Konohagakure. Sasuke's momentary shock faded upon hearing this, but before he could interject his argument, the Hokage waved and quickly said, "See you at the gates bright and early day after tomorrow." He quickly disappeared. TCH, Sasuke grumbled, turning promptly back to face the Uchiha Crest Memorial. Smooth Kakashi, praising him just before assigning him work to do. Unbelievable. Grabbing his left shoulder, the Uchiha couldn't help letting a smile escape as he replayed Kakashi's words in his mind. Standing alone in the tall grass, the breeze tossing his hair across his eyes, Sasuke glanced up at the sun. It was warm on his face and Sasuke found that he quite liked the feeling of it. Everything seemed a little brighter these days, a little warmer. For so long, Sasuke had lived in darkness, numb to all feelings except for the hate that guided his path as an avenger. As if he had been stuck in perpetual winter, the sun seemed to be revealing itself to him a little more each day, approaching him, causing a spring of feeling to rejuvenate him. After Kakashi had left her that night, Sakura found herself not being able to sleep again. Her thoughts kept wandering to Sasuke as she thought about him leaving the village again. She wanted nothing more than to seek him out. Unfortunately, his chakra was nearly non-existent, as he kept it completely concealed. The only reason she knew he was still in the village was because Kakashi told her to go visit a friend. If there was one person the Uchiha had to stay in contact with, it would be the Hokage. The day after that, Sakura had been so tired that she slept throughout the entire day. She would wake up to eat, use the bathroom, and she even attempted to get up and sit on the couch at one point but ended up falling asleep again. She hadn't realized just how tired she had been and was relieved to feel her chakra replenishing slowly. At the crack of dawn, the following morning, Sakura was woken by the faint streams of light spilling across her face from her window. Despite the birds singing outside, Sakura could hear the steady pit-pat of the rain on her roof. Glancing out the small window on the left side of her bed, Sakura watched the rain hit her windowsill for a few minutes, then quickly decided to open the window to sit out a little pot of flowers that Ino had given her under one of the drops that was spilling off the awning. She frowned at the sight of her wilting flowers. Glancing around her apartment, Sakura noticed that like her flowers, her apartment had also been neglected. Unfortunately, due to her almost consistent pace at work, Sakura hadn't been able to clean her apartment in some time. There were clothes towering in the corner of her room, dishes piled in the sink, and a thin layer of dust on almost every surface. She sighed at the sight of it, knowing what her mother would say if she were to see her daughter living in this state. Well, it was decided then. Jumping out of bed, Sakura tied her hair up, changed into some cleaning clothes, and set to work. The rain was a lulling sound, and even though she spent hours scrubbing and washing, the noise eased her mind and she began to feel a little of the stress lift off of her shoulders. At one point, Sakura wanted to open all the windows so the rain could make its noise inside, but she knew that would be a silly thing to do. Instead, she decided to cook. It wouldn't be long before her food would go bad. She hadn't eaten much the past few days and a lot of her groceries had already expired. Deciding to cook all of what she had left, Sakura ended up making enough food to feed an entire family. As she chopped the tomatoes, she couldn't help but think of the ninja whose favorite food was the red fruit. She remembered Naruto arguing with the Uchiha about whether or not it was a vegetable or fruit. Of course, they had asked her and she told them it was a fruit. She smiled at the fond memory. Glancing out the kitchen window, Sakura noted that the rain was beginning to get a little heavier. Where was that certain Uchiha right now? What would he be doing? She looked at all the food around her. Well, she could take him something to eat. It was the perfect excuse. If she went looking for him now, would she even find him? Slipping into the raincoat hanging next to her door, Sakura cradled the bento close to her body to avoid getting it wet. Stepping out into the rain, she glanced in the direction of the Uchiha compound. Well, it was a good place to start. Sakura was a lot closer to the compound now, being on this side of the village. Why she had moved closer, she had no idea. Maybe it was because she wanted to completely separate from her parents, or perhaps she wanted to live as far away from her other friends as she possibly could. It was difficult for Sakura, seeing everyone move on and find happiness while she waited and waited for the same man who was here and now avoiding her. What did she do in her past life to deserve falling in love with a man who had no desire for her? Would she ever find her own happiness? When Sasuke was in prison, Sakura had often tried to visit him. She wasn't allowed to see him except for the occasional check-up appointment that she was allowed to perform in order to make sure he was healthy and not rotting away behind bars. He would perk up slightly when he sensed her chakra signature enter the building, and it broke her heart to see the man she loved bound the way that he was with a seal over his eyes. How they had ever managed to reduce him to such a state was simply because he let them. She would touch his shoulder kindly and ask him all the procedural questions a doctor would ask their patient. She wasn't allowed more than 40 minutes at a time with him, but in those 40 minutes she would tell him what was going on outside with everyone. Sometimes, but more rarely, would he participate in conversation with her. Once, hearing the guard's footsteps returning, Sasuke leaned towards her, asking, "When will you come back?" She hadn't been able to give him a definite answer. Looking down at the package in her hand, she wished she would have been able to do more for him back then. The only thing she had ever been able to do was work her hardest and wait for him. Would there ever be a day where she could walk by his side, assisting him on his journey? After a few wet minutes in the rain, Sakura looked up at the small wooden entrance that read, Uchiha. Carved into the supporting posts were two red and white fans, the Uchiha family crest. Well, Sakura thought, here we go. Stepping through the entrance, Sakura found herself staring out at a field of tall grass. She looked left and right, not seeing anyone. Her heart sank a little, but then she noticed that in the center, rising from the grass, stood a large pillar of stone emblazoned with the Uchiha crest. As Sakura got closer, she could see that the names of every Uchiha had been etched onto its surface. It surprised Sakura to see. She had been here after the destruction had been cleared but never saw the memorial. In fact, she had the feeling that nobody had. Did Kakashi do this? It was something she could see her former sensei doing. She supposed he did it in secret to protect it from would-be violators, those who held a grudge against the Uchiha clan. Squinting in the rain, she reached out to touch its surface. It was cold and wet as the rain bounced off of it. A feeling of sadness overcame Sakura as she trailed her fingers down the list of names, coming to rest over Uchiha Itachi, and then Sasuke Uchiha, whose name was at the very bottom of the list. Sakura. She jumped away from it, jerking around in reflex. The bento she had been carrying fell from her hands, the contents spilling out onto the grass. She pulled her hood back from her face to see the figure standing before her. A rain-drenched Sasuke stood staring at her, a touch of confusion in his features. His coat was completely soaked and water poured from his bangs, running down the sides of his cheeks. For a second, the rain almost made it look like Sasuke was crying, and Sakura couldn't help but realize where she was and imagine what a young, distraught little Uchiha experienced in this place. Sasuke. She called out to him, raising her voice a little over the developing rain. She bent down, scooping up the spilt contents back into its box. You frightened me. What are you doing here? He asked, taking a step towards her. I came to bring you some food, she gestured to the bento, trying to smile at him through the sheets of rain. I didn't think I would actually find you, though. I'm sorry it's ruined. Come on, he said tiredly, waving to her to follow him. She quickly did so and followed him towards the woods, wondering what she had done wrong. Sasuke took them to the thickest part of the forest where the trees blanketed the sky, shielding them from most of the rain. He stopped at a large tree, taking his coat off and hanging it on a branch. She glanced around her feet, noting the remains of a campfire and a disassembled structure which she assumed was some kind of tent. Realization suddenly dawned on her. Sasuke, you're not sleeping out here, are you? He glanced over at her, then sat down, leaning his back against the tree. After a long second, he replied, it suits me. She frowned at the sight of him, dirty and wet. When was the last time he had gotten to rest in a proper house? When was the last time he had access to running water and fresh food? She shook her head in disbelief. Did Kakashi not? Yes, he interrupted, redirecting his gaze away from her, he did. I refused. She squatted down, making herself level with him and saying, but you're drenched. His eyes flashed over at her, slight annoyance sharpening his voice as he replied, I wouldn't be, had someone not been standing like an idiot in the rain. Aren't medic ninjas supposed to know something about colds? She frowned at him, narrowing her eyes at his attitude. Had coming here really made him this annoyed with her? If he hadn't concealed his chakra, if he hadn't made every attempt to avoid her since walking her home that night, then she wouldn't have had to stand out in the rain like a total idiot. She refused to tell him these things. She also resisted the urge to throw the remains of the bento box at his face. Her scowl softened slightly when she noticed the dark circles under his eyes and the rigid way he held his body, all signs of fatigue. Suddenly, she grabbed his coat from the branch and threw it at him instead. He caught it, his only visible eyebrow raising in surprise. Come with me. You need a shower. Thanks for watching.